So, Jeff, you're kind of in the center of the shoe universe. I mean, you just mentioned you have I don't know how many years um, of selling shoes, modifying shoes, wearing shoes, and it's an interesting time because we're recording this September 2020, and over the past year or more, been all of a sudden a lot of controversy around shoes in the competitive distance running world with the introduction of certain types of carbon plates inside shoes, and there's this whole question of at what point is shoe technology um, an unfair advantage? Is it? I mean, where do you draw the line? Can you just run a marathon on roller skates? Like, what's so? There's this kind of somewhat ethical debate around shoes and what's acceptable. They're starting to draw lines around what's acceptable in major marathons, things like that. So, I guess first of all, to start this part of the talk off, can you just say a little bit about, like, just generally, like, what is your general philosophy of around what a running shoe should be?
All right. So that said, this is a great topic, and we could go on for days on this one. But this is I'm in the shoe business. I sell shoes. So what I'm about to say, don't, it's going to sound a little weird. But I think the greatest of all engineers, created us, and he didn't make a whole lot of mistakes. So our feet are pretty well designed. So I think the most efficient way to run is to run like you're barefoot, but with a shoe on, because we can't run barefoot on asphalt, concrete, sand spurs, nails, glass, so on and so forth. And we weren't meant to run. We weren't meant to run on pavement and concrete and all these surfaces that we run on. I mean, our bodies weren't designed for that. Now you say, oh, the Tarahumara Indians down in Mexico, well, they run barefoot. Well, they do, but they actually have very flexible foot structure. We can get into that a little bit later, but most of us of European descent have a more rigid foot, okay? Well, more rigid feet don't absorb as much shock. So you better run on a soft surface if you're going to run barefoot. But a more flexible foot can run barefoot on harder surfaces. All the Tarahumaras and, say, the East Africans do run a lot on soft surfaces, clay and so on. So when it comes to shoe design, I think a shoe that tries to uh, enhance the characteristics of the barefoot are the way to run. In other words, you don't want a shoe that inhibits that motion. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about medial and lateral motion. I'm talking about forward motion. When we're running, we're going in a forward motion. We're not playing basketball. We're not playing tennis. We're not going from side to side. So we want a shoe that encourages that forward motion. On the other hand, if someone has problems like, quote, overpronation or underpronation, supination, maybe we want to address that by giving them some structure on the medial or the lateral side. But when we start to inhibit that forward motion, we start to work. Those 33 joints in the foot are meant to articulate, which that articulation absorbs shock, and it propels the body. When we start to inhibit that, we start to make the body less efficient. Example, myself, I've raced quite a lot barefoot because shoe technology has come so far. When I started running, shoes were not anywhere near like they are today. We didn't have the foams we did and so on. And wearing shoes sometimes was an inhibiting factor. I actually raced, like I say, barefoot. And if anybody can remember the incident in 1984 where Zola Budd connected with Mary Decker on the track, and Mary Decker fell, and she was America's darling, and the South African Zola Budd, who tripped her up, was running barefoot. So anyway, back to what I'm saying is, if we can make the foot more efficient and function like it's barefoot, but give it a little bit of cushioning and a little bit of better traction, I believe that's the way to go. But now, that said, I actually have worked on shoes since the 70s, trying to make shoes make somebody faster. And I started working on shoes and selling shoes in 1978, where I would not only work on my own shoes, I'd work on friend shoes and customer shoes and so on. And what I learned is, running on indoor wooden tracks, I found that some people could actually run faster on these raised wooden tracks than they could on a non-raised wooden track. And a raised wooden track has support structures. And so if the people that could run efficiently on boards would sometimes get more bounce off the boards. So for years, I tried to create shoes that would give you more bounce, whether it be with foams, whether it would be gluing a suspended net under the foot to work like a trampoline. I did all kinds of stuff to make it better. I took foam from toys, for instance, which other people have done too. I took foam out of toys and put them on the bottom of shoes. I took the soles off of shoes, and so I was just running on the foam. Lots of different things to actually be faster. But in the early 90s, I started working on using composite fibers, which means fiberglass, carbon, Kevlar, graphites, and so on, trying to create something that would actually propel you faster. And I was actually worked extensively in this field. It had been done before. People had tried carbon fiber, for instance, but it was unsuccessful. It made shoes stiff, made people have Achilles injuries, and so on. But I was able to be pretty successful with this. But at the time, I couldn't get a manufacturer on board with it because they'd have to retool up their factory, and it would be a very expensive process. But to give you an example, I was able to build shoes with glass, fiberglass. If you think about a pole vault pole, the fibers can elongate and contract. So when what's his name, Bob Seagren, was jumping the pole vault, I'm not going to know the exact figures here, but in 1968 they invented fiberglass poles. Before that, basically poles did not flex; they were kind of like stiff levers. The fiberglass pole, you'd plant the pole, it would flex, the fibers would elongate, and then they'd spring you forward over the bar. Okay, so I learned quickly that carbon fiber, graphites, Kevlar, and so on could give you structure and support, but fiberglass fibers could elongate and contract and actually propel you forward. And I built several shoes out of glass. I actually had several manufacturers make some prototype samples. And here's a good example. Some friends of mine were trying to break 3 hours in the marathon at the Tybee Island Marathon in Georgia. And I said, well, here, let me go down with you and I'll pace you so you can do that. Well, I wore a pair of fiberglass shoes that I had built. Now, they were still in a crude stage. Remember, I'm building these in my garage. And I was at a point where I still hadn't figured out the proper bonding to make bonds that were flexible enough because the bond goes through a lot of stress. But anyway, so I ran the marathon with them, and yes, we broke 3 hours and all that stuff. But the next day, which was shocking, is I was able to go out and run a hard 10-mile workout. And most of you who've run marathons understand that the day after marathon, sometimes you can't walk downstairs. But I was able to do that. And it made me realize that I was really onto something here. Not only was running, that wasn't a fast time for me or anything like that, but I was able to run with very little effort with basically springs on my feet. And because the fiberglass worked as a decelerating factor, like the muscles that are usually involved in decelerating the body were no longer used, I wasn't as sore the next day. So, on and on, I've learned a lot. But yeah, we're in a time right now where we're talking about, can shoes make you faster? Oh, absolutely. No question about it. Whether the shoes we see on the market right now with the new carbon plate technology is the way to go, I don't know the answer to that. I know I did a lot of work with this. I know that when I made shoes too stiff using carbon fiber, I saw Achilles problems, calf problems, hamstring problems, patella tendon problems. I saw those kind of issues. Could it propel you to be faster? Yes, but the long-term effect on the muscles, I don't know. I mean, my verdict is still out on that. But I do know that it is possible to make you faster with a shoe. Now, in the I believe it was 1890s, in the track and field rule book, there was specifically paragraphs written about not being able to use springs in shoes. Well, so we look at it now and we say, well, these are springs. Can we use these, or should these be legal? Well, if we look at the shoes that go back to Pavo Norby that he had in the 1920s, basically they were shoes with maybe a leather sole, or what they might have called plim soles, where they had some gum rubber for traction on the bottom. Well, if you look at that shoe and then you look at, say, what I started running in back in the late 60s and 70s, and then you look at today's shoes are springs, even if you don't put any carbon plate in them. Today's shoes are so much springier, so much livelier, allow you to train so much harder, so many more miles without getting the abuse that we got back then. If you take a shoe that we had just in my era, I'm not talking 100 years ago. I'm just saying in my era, if you put a shoe on that some of us train hundreds of miles a week in, and you were to run across a parking lot today, you would not want to do that. You say, how the heck do you run in that? So there's constantly an evolution in equipment, and right now we are seeing a big deal. Now, should this be legal? I don't know the answer, but I'll say this: that records are meant to be shot for. People are meant, that's why you put records out there to motivate other people to shoot for those records. I just don't know that you can't compare an athlete of this era with one 20 years ago with one 20 years before that, and so on, because of the technology and advancements. I think we are at a stage of revolution. We're going to see so much happening now. I'm so glad to see the manufacturers, all the manufacturers, not just one, but all of them retooling up, understanding that composite fibers are the way to go. I knew this years ago that if you could make a shoe out of composite fibers, not only could you keep somebody from getting hurt, you could actually let them train faster, harder. The shoes would last. For instance, on my project that I worked on, believe it or not, Oakley was going to get in the shoe business. They tested my midsole. Most foams have an energy return factor of 12 to 15%, but after 100 miles, they're down to about 8%. My project that I worked on had an energy return factor of 46%, and after 5,000 miles, it still had 46%. So we are definitely at a stage of evolution, revolution, whatever you want to call it. I mean, shoes are going to come even farther exponentially probably than they have come, but we are majorly advanced over where we were in the 70s.
It sounds like you're not too concerned about technology ruining the purity of the sport, or worried about, stopping the progress of this technology. I mean, but you also said you don't really know where the line should be. So it seems like there's two ways to look at this. On the one hand, you could say, well, we got to draw a line on this technology because pretty soon we're going to have people running on trampolines and it's not running anymore. And so we got to make rules and regulate shoes, as far as competitive Olympic, elite athletes are concerned. But I guess the problem there is wherever you do draw the line is going to be pretty arbitrary, because we've already come light years ahead where we were, just like you said. But then on the other hand, you could say, and you hear this argument when it comes to performance-enhancing drugs is, look, it's just to make it an even playing field, make it whatever it is available to everybody, make it free. Everybody has their own individual choice, and then as long as everybody's on the same playing field, it really doesn't matter, because it's not like you can compare, like you just said, you can't compare today's records to 50 years ago anyway. So what's the difference? Do you think there is a point of like, all right, that's too much?
Well, yeah, all right. So the IAAF, the International Athletic Federation, decided that, yes, they got to put some limits on this. All right. Coincidentally, the major manufacturer that has the most money in the game, their shoe that they were promoting was 40 millimeters thick. I'm sorry, 39.5 millimeters thick, I believe it was. So the IAAF said, okay, shoes can't be more than 40 millimeters thick. So that shoe then fit under the limit. Okay, so now all the other manufacturers can say, okay, we can do that, but we have to stay within that. I mean, as you can imagine, if you take it to the extreme, have you seen those things? I don't know what they're called, where you run on looks like a rollerblade, but it's got big springs on the bottom, and your stride length is like 3 times normal or whatever. Obviously, we don't want to get to that point. But so there's an arbitrary line has been drawn now at 40 millimeters thickness for a shoe. Okay, well, this is this as they say, slippery slope. I mean, we want to see people perform their best, but what I'm more concerned about now is not just speed, but I want to see runners not get hurt. I don't want to see technology that makes you faster but gets you hurt. I don't know if anybody ever saw the movie The Jerk, where Steve Martin was this character who invented a thing for your eyeglasses, where you could pick your eyeglasses up with a thing that's stuck on the bridge, and you never touch the earpiece, so you didn't ruin your eyeglasses, and you put them on a shelf, and they would stay in place. Well, he became a gazillionaire. Everybody loved him, and so on. But after a year or two, everybody became cross-eyed. So I don't want to see technology get to the point that it makes people faster, but gets people hurt. I want to see people enjoy the sport more. And if running in shoes that give you more spring and keep you from getting hurt, that comes along, I think that's great.